Welcome to this third video in my program about Seidr, the old Nordic tradition of shamanic magic. Today's talk I call The Story of the Vision of the Seeress. And in our latest video, number 2 in the series, we heard about the saga Seidr of Thorbjörg Little Volva. And that was about how to do sight in a big group of people for community and indoor. Today we're going to look at how we would do Seidr and in fact also a vision quest type of Seidr outside, alone. And this all comes about because once in the Viking Age, there was a very experienced cunning woman or wise woman or side performer, side worker, who went out to do an utiseta, a vision quest. And the fantastic visions and experiences she had that night resulted, in fact, in one of our most famous mythical poems called VĽUSPÁ, meaning the spa, the vision, the prophecy of the vulva, the Seeress. And that's our topic today. And so first I'm gonna give you my take on what actually happened that night, not actually, but what could have happened in this, also in this fairy tale reality of her going out and what she went through out there, and how that in fact changed her and maybe also changed us when she came back, and it turned into a poem. And next I would like to give you also my personal selection of those verses. It's a very short part of the very, very long poem. Those verses I think are relating mostly to our project here, is both of how can that whole tradition and everything Old Norse and the cosmology, the mythology of that time enrich and inform our practice here and now. So that we're not playing Vikings, but we are, should we say, checking out the ground we're standing on with respect. And later on we might go, and that's when we return indoor, I think, to the warm house, we can go into more detail about some of the topics that the poem introduces us to. I should also say that my focus is not, or I have no ambition or desire to try to make a new analysis of the whole poem. But my focus is on what can I learn from VĽUSPÁ, and also embracing a lot of the newer research. With that look, what can we learn from that poem here and now? Around 1,000 years ago, a vulva, a side-working wise woman, went out to do a vision quest. It was probably in Iceland. I dare say that she was already then an experienced worker of magic, of Seidr. And at this point in her career, or in her apprenticeship to the spirits and the gods, she gets a new calling for taking a deeper step, a new step. And so therefore she goes out on a vision quest, done in the Nordic way as an utiseta. So around sunset she takes her staff and goes away from the houses and the smell of wood smoke and sheep, and go up in the hills and find a good place to sit. I'm rather sure she brought her staff, both because it's very practical when you walk around in the mountains in the darkness, and also because I think as she was skilled in magic, it will fall her so natural to combine her vision questing with elements from her Seidr experience, which is, for example, that when she sat there and started it, I think she would be singing out her plea for connection, for spirits and gods to come to her and educate her. And so I hear her human voice singing out in the landscape and mixing with all the 1,000 voices of the river flowing right by. And as darkness fell, the darker it gets, the clearer she could see. Not that she was journeying away or sitting with closed eyes, but the darkness allows you to see what's otherwise invisible. And during the time her vision got stronger, she saw way back in time. She saw the primal forces, remembering her own beginnings, her own spiritual ancestry, and the origin of the world and all the people of it, which is both humans and gods and elves and giants, Jotnar, and dwarves and animals, and all how their relationships evolves with love and conflict and everything. So she would say at the climax or the deepest of the night, something important happens. Because all of a sudden Odin, the god Odin, appears in front of her and looks her into her eye and sort of wants to know what she has done to prove herself ready, that makes him feel that she is, she's ready to go to the next level, so to speak, go deeper. She tells him a token thing, should we say, which makes him accept. And so he gives her gifts that make her ready to go further. It is said that it is both gold and rings, but most important is words of wisdom and new magic skills. And then all of us, well, not all of a sudden, but then the world, the vision, the many dimensionality of the universe opens even more to her. And she sees wide in every world, it is said. And it goes on, because it turns into a lot of verses. And so it must have been profoundly changing for her. I don't think she was the same person coming down that mountain as when she went up there the night before. And at one point, before dawn arrives, then Odin also gives her maybe the most important task, at least for us, is that to go home and tell her people everything she was shown. So she comes home to the houses, to society, to Midgard again. And after she has gathered herself and digested all this, now is the question, how can she relate this to her people, to her community, so they can also feel the power, so they can see with her eyes the fantastic landscapes and scenery she saw? And the answer is through poetry. Now, I think already up there on the mountain, when she saw things, experienced things, she would sing them out. Like now I just heard the crow and I could sing, "Hello crow, I hear the crow coming this way right over me." And we know that this is, it enhances any kind of vision quest or should we say, a piece of side work done outside. So maybe fragments or sketches for her poem, she already had them with her in her mind when she came back. And we must remember that she was out of an oral tradition. She was so trained in remembering. And when experiences sort of arrive and they already start coming out of your mouth in poetry, that also works as a way of a memo technique, so you can better remember. Well, at one point she was ready to step forward, and so in a circle in her community or in a group, she chants to them for the first time of her experiences. And it was received well. It was remembered. And then for the next generations, both ordinary people would keep chanting this poem to each other. Both ordinary people and also the Skalds in the bigger halls. This went on for centuries, even a couple of centuries into that area where Iceland, in fact, officially had turned Christian. Then in what we could say is maybe in the last minute, they were written down because parts of them had started disappearing or being changed. And they were written down carefully by those few who could write at this point on big fat pieces of sheepskin parchment. And this poem here, that I don't know if it was already then called VĽUSPÁ, it was together with other important mythical poems collected in, should we say, maybe not books, but bundles of parchment. And that is how they are given to us. And this is the first, as this bundle of poems here, we call the Poetic Edda. And it is the very first part of Nordic literature. Up until today, there has been so many understandings of it and translations of it, and everybody, it's still something that challenges us and inspires us. And it's kind of a popular view that it was a poem constructed, or should we say written by an author, a poet. And I have a quote from a historian of religion who said something like, whether the author of VĽUSPÁ was a heathen or a Christian man has long been the object of discussion. But I think that VĽUSPÁ is exactly what it says it is. It is the vision of a vulva. And what she brought back there was very influential also for her people's view of spirituality. And this is nothing unique. This is like a story we've heard in many versions all over the world through times, that a seer goes out and gets new revelation and brings them back to either empower or inspire the tradition. And this then is how it came to be, that the vision of a vulva going out on a mountain 1,000 years ago ended up being one of our most important pieces of Nordic literature. I want now to share with you a part of that long, long poem that is very dear to me, and I feel is very essential to our work together. And I'm going to sing it, and this is my tune, or should we say, not quite, but I got it such a night up on the field in Iceland, and where I sat by the river in all the 1,000 voices of it. And all of a sudden, this melody that I use for VĽUSPÁ just hit me, just came to me. It's been with me ever since. And also in the same moment, I just knew which verses were important for me to have with me in my practice and in my teaching. And that's what you're going to hear now. I've sort of tried to adjust a translation that is understandable, but I also that I can relate to. And it's inspired by a lot of different translations and also what I have further learned from some of my mentors. Yeah. So here we go. Hear me, all my sacred kin, children of Heimdall, both higher and lower. Odin, you want me to well recount ancient tales of folk from the first times I remember. I remember the giants, the Jotnir, the earliest born, those who fostered me so long ago. 9 worlds I recall, 9 branches, roots of the famous tree of fate under the world. In the beginning of time it was, where Ymir built his home, was neither sand nor sea nor cooling waves. Earth was not, nor sky above, only a gap of ideas, of myths beyond knowing. Of grass was nothing. Until the gods Bur's sons lifted up the land, proclaimed it, pronounced it, and they built Midgard here. And sun shone from the south on foundations of stone, so the ground was covered in green leagues. Yes, sun came from the south, companion to moon, and she grasped with her right hand heaven's rim. Sun didn't know where her halls were. Stars didn't know where their places were. And moon didn't know what his power, what his mien was. Then almighty powers stepped forward to their seats. The gods held council and made this clear. Night and waxing and waning was named. They gave name to morning and midday and dusk, so that years could be measured. Do you know everything yet, or what? An ash I know standing, it called Yggdrasils. Over Urt's well it is evergreen. From there come 3 maidens, much knowing, 3 from the lake deep under the tree. Urt is the first, the second Verdendi, they carved in wood, and Skuld is the third one. Laws they laid down, and lifespans they measured, they pronounced the fate of humanity's children. Heid, she was called when to houses she came, a wise volva and cunning in magic. Seidr she knew, and she performed it well. She was always a bother to death. Do you know everything yet, or what? Alone she set out when the old one came, the terrible one of the Aesir, and he looked into her eyes. He says, "What would you ask me? Why do you test me?" She answers, "Well do I know, Odin, where you hid your eye, in the depth of Mimir's famous well. Mimir drinks from Odin's pledge every morning. Do you know yet, or what? So Odin selected for her rings and gold, gave words of wisdom and magic staves, and wide she saw, wide in every world. Much she knows, and far I see further. Do you know yet, or what? Do you know yet, or what? Now we returned to the inside, to our study chamber. And there are many things we could look at now in what you heard out there by the big willow tree. In fact, it was about those verses that I quoted or that I chanted from VĽUSPÁ. And so one important thing is I would like to look at what kind of method was it that she really used. How could we define it in a way so that we can also know what kind of skill it takes and learn from it. And I would say that she, as a experienced magic performer or worker, would know, when she knows both how Seidr works, she knows her staff well, and she knows about utiseta, the Nordic kind of vision quest, of course, because everybody did then. And it will be natural for her to combine these things when that's practical, when that's the best for the purpose. And in this case, when you go out for asking connection and wisdom from the spirits and from the powers of nature, and you do that going out there on your own, then it is fantastic to combine what I would call lone Seidr and utiseta. But let's just first look at utiseta, the vision quest. And first off, it's rather clear that that's what she's doing, because that is what is said. Is that in verse number 28 or something? I don't remember. Anyway, it says, Ein sat hun uti, meaning alone she sat outside. And that doesn't sound like much. But that's how it is in this Nordic tradition. The vision quest is described in a rather modest way. Uti is the big word here, because that means you go outside the definition, the gates, the fences of the, should we say, the human-controlled or ordered society. And you go out there in the wilder area, where I used to say in Danish that neither the plow nor the law reaches. And it's there where, you see, this thing of going out there and getting new vision and inspiration, and then coming back and crossing again the fence and the gate, and bringing back the knowledge you found out there for humanity, for your community to use. That's almost like a definition of a shaman. Or a lot of other wise and cunning folks in many cultures' tradition. And we can get back to that, because I can spin many ends on this. And so the name we heard in VĽUSPÁ for the human world, the human society, is, see, I'm already doing like this, Midgard. The yard, guard means both the yard, but also the fence that is defining the yard in one word. And mid is in the middle, so to speak. And so it's quite a magic and strong spiritual act to cross the gates there and across the fence and maybe having one eye there and one eye there, being a mediator between worlds. And well, that's a little bit about utiseta, and I'll get back to that. But first, I also want to say about this, the concept of Seidr in this connection, of why do you think that she even did that? It is not said any places in the old Nordic or Norse texts. They have not defined a magical method called solitary Seidr or lone Seidr or whatever you would call it, but it is hinted at. For example, here in the poem of VĽULUSPÁ, it is in some of the, at least it's also referred to her as being a vulva, and in one of the other verses referring to the staff or the staffs in the many-fold meanings of staff. So I've quite found it safe to combine these two things, and I think some other scholars, or I'm not a scholar, but some scholars have also pointed at this. For example, like the Norwegian Gro Steinsland, in what was maybe I can put a note about the title of her book. Yeah. So in a way, the thing is, if you sit out there, it can be totally overwhelming, especially if you have a strong vision like she had. And then in a way, the staff becomes your center of the world. In a way, it also becomes the tree of life, the one that's referred to the ash I see standing, named Yggdrasil. And maybe even all those three, the utiseta, the vulva, the staff, the tree, can become like one. And at least that has happened in many modern practitioners' experiences. And here again is this thing about the life power flowing through the main, flowing through both the tree, yourself, and the staff. And sometimes it's hard to know where one starts and the other ends. Yeah. With utiseta, to come back to that, it's now I just want to say that in some of the later videos or chapters, and also definitely if you are signing up for the Zoom meetings or webinars that is connected to each video, then we will go much more into how do we do such a lone Seidr. What does it take to make it the best possible? And there I'll be leaning on experiences that I have harvested from my students within the last 35 years or something. Because it's a wonderful, it's such a simple ritual thing. It's not like Thorbjørn's big group side, because that can be a big complicated ceremonial thing to get up and rolling. And but this is so simple. Now, with utiseta and Midgard, there's another little thing, and you heard in some of the first verses that it was sung that in the beginning of times, where Ymir made his home. Ymir is, should we say, the primal giant, Jotun. He, should we say, there are many ways of looking at how this happens, but should we say in the mythical poems that are older than the prose and other writings and interpretations, then we do know that Ymir was transformed and became, should we say, the body of the earth. That his bones became the mountains, his blood was the rivers. So it's from one order to the other. And it is not until we get to, it's not mentioned in the mythical poems, not until the later text that in fact that the gods killed him in order to do this transformation. Now, how does your world feel if he wasn't? Then how is it then to step on the earth? One thing especially could be fun here is that it is said then that from his eyelashes was made the guard, the fence around Midgard. And this is for me almost like trying to quote in a good way one of my mentors, the Danish mythologist Henning Kure, and who is describing extremely clearly how this thing of, okay, so what about what is it that is defined by the eyelashes? That's our eyes. So that Midgard is like also like the visible world. And when you go outside, on the other side of the eyelashes, that's when you maybe see, with your eyes closed, you see visions. Or when you go out there in the darkness, you will not see stones. You will see jotnar or trolls or vetir or whatever they are. That's when they come forward and show they are alive. There are also quite a few examples of, I think Alvis Mol is also talking about this. So there's this whole play on the visible and the invisible, and what does it take to make the invisible visible, or at least so you can sense it. And that means both to go out beyond Midgard and also go out in the darkness that make the invisible visible. This is one of my favorite topics, you can tell, I'm sure. We've gotten mentioned here Ymir as one of the primal forces, and also Midgard. Then I mentioned also other things. I did mention the three Norns, Urd, Verdande and Skuld, living around or below the great tree of life, the ash of Yggdrasils. And I think I will also say a little bit about, not them, but should we say one of the, could we call them the mythical vulvas that are mentioned in VĽUSPÁ, the one that is called Seidr. And this is quite a common name to give to a vulva in one of the more fantastic sagas, the later sagas. It's sort of a good name for, a proper name for a vulva. It's almost like in Danish, like a proper name for a fox is Mikkel, then everybody knows what it is. Now, when she comes to houses and is performing Seidr, then there is in the last couple of lines in that verse is something that has been provoking and tickling people for centuries, and I would like to use that as an example of that we can't expect to find any new or perfect translation of VĽUSPÁ, because there are so many words that have either we don't quite know what they meant, or they have 2 or 3 meanings at the same time, and what you have to make a choice when you translate. In Christian times, should we say, then the reputation of Seidr and of the vulva, especially if they were doing Seidr for change, was not a very good one. Should we say the ethics of Seidr and of the people performing it is a topic we'll return to, I think, in our next lecture, because we will look at side workers from saga and history. But here it's the common translation of this verse is that when she arrived, she was always welcome by what are they called? wicked women. And this has, it comes from one of the key words there in that sentence is Angan. But that can also mean something totally different. And I guess the reason that the interpretation or the translation chosen that she is a bad one, and it's always these willful, not illasinnede, det er det jeg try to translate here, the bad women who liked her and asked her to be welcome, so of course she's bad too. But that choice is also made because of, on the basis of a lot of other interpretations. So just for, not for fun, but because it's possible, when I chanted it here, I did it also inspired by Henning Kur. It's hard to do it in English also, where I try to say that, you see, Angan can both mean ascent, something like pleasant, and that has led to this thing of that she was welcome, or that she was in favor of. But Angan can also mean a sting, like the sting of a bee. And these women that are mentioned can also be understood as death, or the angry maiden. And this is just to show how much is still to be discussed and not to be, should we say, cut in stone. That sort of brings me to say I have to make some things clear also about translation. I don't know how many I've read throughout the years, English and Danish and Swedish, and there is not such a thing as the perfect translation, but then it gives inspiration to also compare it to one's own experience. And so I have been inspired by a lot of translations to come up with, should we say, that little appetizer you had out there in the willow tree, and we could maybe make some notes. But there is, I think we're gonna put some notes below the video about a few websites you could visit to see translations into English. And for the source text in Norse, it's always, I think it's great to go to the website called heimskringla.no. N-O, it must be called, yeah. So I'm not claiming to do any kind of translation. And sometimes they change because of the audience that I'm singing for. Do they know who Bor's sons are? They are like Odin and his brothers, and so sometimes I'll have to, should we say, translate that too. That's like, so I just want to know enough to be able to use what this poem can give us in relation to learning more about to do a good solo Seidr outside in the darkness with all the beings there. I told you also that the melody I used is one that sort of just came to me out there by the river, by the foss, by the waterfall, in fact, out on the mountain. And that's one way to get a melody. And that for many years I would sing it, but I wouldn't have it recorded. So now it's okay with me. And if you choose, I don't think you can do it, because I'm just doing it. And if you did it, it would be another one. But anyway, if you want to hear some different suggestions or new takes on a melody used to kvæde, to chant VĽUSPÁ, I would first recommend the music, a special CD, record, in fact, a CD of Einar Selvik called Skald. And on that one, he has two versions of melodies for VĽUSPÁ, which I'm so happy, because the one which you can also just find on YouTube, just if you just Google it, which just add it in VĽUSPÁ, Einar Selvik, that's the Skaldic version. You can imagine that has happened maybe a generation or two after that the Vision Quest took place. And here is this Skald, with a good party and everybody is animated. And then he steps out on the floor, and maybe with his lyre, and sings or chants, "Hear me." Or maybe he even have to say, "Silence, I must ask." And then it's like a rather dramatic melody chosen to be done in such an occasion. And a more intimate melody that deals maybe more with just the one sitting out there telling it as it is. And other exciting ones would be the Swedish artist, what can I call her, maybe most vocal and music and song, Kersti Ståby. And she has done some very, very new thinking takes on VĽUSPÁ, trying to perform it within the context of other traditions who also have this thing of chanting a kvæð. You can go and check that out for yourself. Yeah, but maybe in fact I would most of all recommend for you that you just take your staff and you go out yourself in beyond the fence and beyond the gates, where you can't see any houses or any human any human home, and then find your own melody. Maybe you find a few should we say favorite verses that are like power stories for you from VĽUSPÁ, or any other poem, maybe a poem you've gotten yourself out there, and then ask for a melody. So, do you know yet, or what? Thank you for today, and I look forward to next chapter, next video. I think it will be this one that is called Side Workers in History and in Saga.